All right. Hello, everyone. This is a full room of people. It's really good. So I'm Mary. I'm the development coordinator and one of the advocates with domestic violence services. I brought Cody with me. She's here to help answer questions towards the end. So we're here to talk to you about domestic violence, a little bit, kind of a brief overview of what it is, and then just a few little tips of how to help. So it's really important to talk about domestic violence year-round, but right now is a really good time to think about it because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So this is time for us to take a minute, relax, and try to reflect on some key points here. So during this month, our agency and lots of other people too, take time to remember those that we've lost to domestic violence because domestic violence fatalities are an unfortunate reality. And we want to honor those that have gone and have lost that battle. We also want to remember and honor those that are still struggling with domestic violence, whether that's in their homes still, currently in a relationship, or they've tried to leave and continue to have challenges as they do that. And then, of course, we want to celebrate those who have gone through domestic violence and are surviving and hopefully thriving after abuse. So this is where we're coming from with this presentation this month is remembering these key points. And we have to remember that domestic violence happens to anyone. It happens to everyone. This impacts people regardless of all the things. So regardless of race, religion, socioeconomic background, education levels. This happens in entire communities too. So there's some national statistics that we take from the National Domestic Violence Coalition, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, sorry. And so these are that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been the victim of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So this isn't talking about all domestic violence. This is talking about severe domestic violence that has could be physical injuries, could be strangulation, could be assault. So this usually has to do with the physical aspect of that. If we look at general domestic violence, that could look a lot differently. And so if we're talking about psychological aggression, a lot of people experience this in their relationship, about half. This is all men and women in the United States. And this is not just in the United States, this is a United States study, but this is happening worldwide. But it's one of those things that we don't talk about, but this is happening to half the people in the world. These are people we know, they're people we care about, sometimes they're us, and a lot of times people suffer in silence. Domestic violence is more than physical violence. I think a lot of times, we remember those things because those are the things that we see in the news. They're probably what you all see medically more often, would be those physical things that do happen. But it can be a lot of things. It could be emotional abuse, physical, spiritual, sexual, social, and financial. And all of these things encompass all parts of life because abuse happens in all parts of life. And control is really where we look as advocates. It's not so much of the physical stuff, but at all the other things, all the elements of that relationship. Because domestic violence is about power and control. It's not just about asserting physical violence, because we see a lot of times physical violence isn't presented until later on in a relationship. It's about controlling every part of somebody's life. And this tends to happen slowly. It's not something that on the first date you go out there and they say, oh, well, I'm gonna hit you today, and then you go on a second date. That's not what happens. These things are slow fades. And to the point where once it's noticeable, they're already really far into a relationship. So power and control could look like forcing someone to do something that the perpetrator wants them to do. So forcing them to have children when they're not ready, forcing them to move in, to move fast in this relationship, forcing them to quit a job or to start a new job, forcing them to put their name on the utilities so that it's harder for them to leave. So it's putting somebody's opinions aside and forcing them to do that. We also see abusers forcing people to stop doing things that they don't want someone to do. So you don't get to go to work. You don't get to hang out with your friends or your family. It takes things away from people in that sense. And so it's not you come to this decision together because maybe this isn't a good work experience for you. It's, well, this isn't a good work experience for you, so you need to quit, or you should quit. And then this also can look like making decisions for people, without really taking into consideration how they might feel about it or what that might do for their future. Because this person knows better a lot of times. And so these decisions could be really, really big decisions. They could start off really minor. So this could be, well, I threw away your birth control because I think we're ready to have kids, rather than it being a discussion. I went in and traded in the old car for a new car because we need to have something nicer when you roll up to work, things like that. So it's not a discussion, it's just making those decisions without taking into account someone else's opinion. And again, this can start off really subtly, and then as the relationship goes on, this becomes a bigger and bigger thing. So it starts off with looking like a compromise, looking like a conversation, when in reality, it's a pre-planned thing where they already have an idea of what they want, and they keep pushing. And this is where sometimes survivors and victims feel really bad because they feel like they're the ones that made that decision. They're the ones that stopped talking to friends and family, and they take on that guilt themselves. And so that's one way that this abuse continues to happen, is then they start feeling shame towards themselves, and that perpetrator continues to shame and blame them for the things that the perpetrator is really doing behind the scenes. So why do people stay? This is usually the part in a presentation that people are like, well, why would you stay in that relationship? There are lots of reasons people stay. People stay in unhealthy relationships that aren't abusive for longer than they probably should. People stay in healthy relationships where they don't want to be in a relationship anymore for longer. This is the same with abuse too. We also have additional challenges that come into play for survivors. And so first thing is it's dangerous to leave. It's not usually really easy to walk out of these relationships. And that's because abusers will sometimes escalate behaviors when they think that they're losing control. And so they'll do anything to get that power and control back. Sometimes that could look like being really, really charming, buying things, going and doing fun things, showing up to events and being this kind person. Or it could be physical force where they start locking the doors when they leave, taking keys, sabotaging vehicles, sometimes calling the police on a victim or survivor for things that may or may not have happened. So they'll do anything that they can to keep that control. And this is the most dangerous time. This statistically, regardless of what study you look at, is the most dangerous time for survivors, is when they're trying to get out of this relationship. So this is as they're leaving or in the months following after they've left, the fatality risk goes way up. This is where most of our severe, serious injuries happen, or fatalities. This is a dangerous time for survivors, and a lot of times they know that. And so this can be scary enough to keep people in that. Good news is most will leave an abuser, and this is a really positive thing. It can feel like especially if it's a loved one, that you're trying really hard and nothing seems to be working. Most survivors do leave abusers. On average, it takes up to 7 times for some. For some, it takes the first time something happens, they're gone, they're out, and they're done. Others, it takes in the double digits, triple digits. We've had a few people in our shelter in there for 20 plus times because it's so hard to leave these situations. So with that, it's important to be aware of this and then be patient as you're working with people, you're talking to people, knowing that they may go back. And if they do go back, what do we do about that? They face lots and lots of challenges when they're getting ready to leave too. So even if they are able to safely leave, that doesn't solve all of the other problems that are happening. It's not as simple as walking away. A lot of times relationships in general are not as simple as just walking away. But with abuse, we have all these other entanglements, including all the danger and abuse and psychological stuff that survivors go through. So every survivor has a unique reason that they leave, a unique reason that they stay, and why they go back. But we do have some common themes that we see. And we shouldn't ever go into working with survivors, regardless of our role, as looking to solve every problem, but to really understand the impact that might have and see how we can help minimize the impact that that has on them. So some common things we see are issues with housing. They may not have a place to go. Maybe they don't want to go to a shelter. Maybe they would rather stay in their car. So sometimes we see that people struggle because they want a place to go. Employment could be an issue. If employers are not understanding, they have to take time off of work. If they don't have a job, they don't have work experience, how are they going to have income? You have to have money to survive in our society. So how are they going to do that? Sometimes those can be challenges. Childcare, people who aren't in abusive situations sometimes struggle with childcare. This is the same for survivors. They might have medical conditions, so maybe this person was their caretaker or their caregiver, and now they have to not only leave, figure out how to leave, but how are they going to fill those needs? Sometimes family values get in the way. We have a certain idea of what family should look like, and sometimes overcoming that with the reality of what's happening is really, really hard. Sometimes religious or spiritual beliefs or the interpretation that's been filtered through the perpetrator can keep people there too. So we've had sometimes where faith leaders in their communities are saying, we don't like abuse is bad, but it gets filtered through the abuser who says, well, this is what the teachings say, and this is what that is. And so a lot of times when you're so isolated, things are filtered through an abuser, you have a skewed sense of what that is. You might have a lot of fear of the unknown, fear of failing, fear of the abuser that this abuse will continue or get worse even after they leave. And then in addition to that, we have abusers who actively try to get survivors to come back. So they use lots and lots of different tactics to try to get what they want. These can be, if you're really loving, or really, really scary too. So they might make promises to change where I'm going to change, I'm going to do better, things aren't going to be the way they were. They might make these big declarations of love that I only do this because I love you so much. You bring out the worst in me because I'm so afraid of losing you, things like that. They might make selective effort. So they're not going to make an effort where it's actually going to change. So I'll go to counseling, and you might see them sign up for counseling, but they're not going to like a batter's intervention course, which would really address those power and control things. Or they'll go to a substance use treatment, but not look at their relationship and the power and control dynamics. So they make selective efforts, so it looks like they're improving. They might threaten to harm other people. They might threaten to disclose personal information. So these could be intimate images, they could be text messages, it could be things that they were hoping not to share with friends and families or employers. And they might manipulate systems and programs. We see it where sometimes perpetrators will call us first to try to get this thing where they can get a conflict of interest so that if they called first, then we would have to turn the next person away. We don't do that. We try to do our best to assess who's really the survivor, who's the perpetrator. But we've seen manipulation in court systems where they have more resources so they can afford an attorney. And they have an attorney at the restraining order hearing, and the survivor doesn't. The survivor's scared, nervous, doesn't know all the legal terms, and there's the restraining order could be dropped. So we see this manipulation of programs and systems pretty often. So what can we do about all this sad stuff, right? Isolation is the most common side effect of domestic violence because perpetrators don't want survivors hearing other things. They don't want them hearing things or opinions outside of the control that they have. So they isolate them. So this can be one of the biggest reasons survivors don't reach out. They don't have a family member that they have talked to. Maybe they've said some really nasty things to their family member because of the abuse they were enduring, or they were trying to defend their partner, and now they don't have that person there. So the first thing is to try to connect with them, and whatever your role is with that survivor. We have different professional boundaries that we need to take, but with loved ones, we can make different connections with them. And so sometimes these relationships, like we said, are severed because of abuse. And so making those meaningful connections can be really, really helpful. But also being aware of the things that we're saying, that we're not telling a victim that they're the reason for this abuse, or that it's their fault that this was happening. And so sometimes that's a self-check where we say, wow, I really shouldn't have said that. Or I imagine that was probably very hurtful, what I said, and having a conversation about it. Also knowing what the resources are. There are lots of different resources for different things. I could tell you should always come to us, but sometimes we're not the people that they need right now. To know what those resources are, knowing that sometimes they don't know what those connections are because they've been so isolated. So know about different resources through the state, through advocacy programs, law enforcement, things like that. You don't have to know everything about everything, just knowing a little bit about those things and how they can make those connections. So community services, avenue for services, how they can reach out to an advocate if that's something that they want, or how they can connect with other resources they might need. Providing options is very, very important. So a lot of times abusers take options away from people. And so as we're trying to help people, we should be doing everything we can to give them their choices and their autonomy, because that's a dignified way to provide services. Also, they're human. So give them options rather than telling them what to do, even if you don't like their choice. So if somebody is leaving an abuser and you say, wow, you should go to this shelter, and they say, I don't want to live with other people. I'm going to stay in my car. I'm going to go stay under the bridge. Not forcing them to come to the shelter, because there could be reasons somebody doesn't want to do that. But giving them the options, letting them choose, and then supporting them the best you can within that choice. And then I hate to do the negative Nancy thing, but be prepared for them to return, because oftentimes survivors will return. Those might be reasons we know, reasons that we don't know. So making sure that they might go back and forth, but that we'll always be there when they are ready to leave. And knowing what those resources might be, not being annoyed, but being patient with them. And then stay up to date. This world is changing constantly, and access to resources, different programs are changing. So seeing what things you might need to stay up to date about what programs are available, what funding is available, how do people access those things. And sometimes learning about services and training and best practices. There's always an update on trauma and trauma-informed care. Being aware of those things in the meantime can be very, very helpful. And then you can always support local programs, not just us, but also all programs that support survivors or those that are in need. If you help locally, you help with local survivors, and that's where a lot of community support comes from. That's a big part of how our program got started, was through local support within the counties. So you can do things to promote services, to volunteer, and you can volunteer directly with survivors. You can volunteer doing supply drives, whatever that looks like. And then participate in fundraisers, trainings, things like that. So, to end, that was pretty good time. If you do have survivors that need help, we are the local community-based advocacy program. And so these are just some of the programs that we offer. We have support, safety planning, emergency shelters, probably what we're most known for. We can help with restraining orders, things like that. So feel free to call and reach out if you have any questions.